Captain Ethan Dre's boots thudded softly against the gleaming floor of the Zorath's ship as he stepped into the grand hall. The vast chamber stretched before him, its walls a sleek mix of metal and strange alien patterns that seemed to pulse with life. It was unlike anything he'd seen before, a beauty and eeriness wrapped into one. He'd been to many alien ships, met countless beings from all corners of the galaxy. But the Zorath were different. Rumor had it that the Zorath had conquered more worlds than any species known to humanity, their dark purple vessels filling the skies of once proud civilizations. The story spoke of their queen, Vaxara, who was not only known for her ruthless intelligence, but also for her unmatched beauty. Ethan had heard the whispers. Some said her looks alone could make even the most steadfast diplomats fall under her spell. Ethan, however, was not so easily swayed. He had spent years in the service of the United Federation, learning to keep his emotions under control in the face of alien royalty, hostile negotiations, and constant pressure. But as he walked into the room where the meeting would take place, he couldn't help but feel a strange pull, an unsettling flutter in his chest. The Zorath Queen was seated upon a throne of blackened crystal, her eyes glowing an eerie violet, and her face a perfect blend of sharp angles and soft curves. She exuded power, yet there was something undeniably captivating about her presence. It was impossible not to be drawn to her, no matter how much he tried to push those thoughts aside. As he approached, the room went quiet. Ethan's feet seemed to drag, but his posture was still straight, his military training kicking in. His mind was sharp and clear until she spoke.
"What do you think of me, Captain?"
Queen Vaxara's voice was like velvet, smooth and hypnotic, carrying the weight of 1,000 years of rule. She didn't ask this as a question of vanity. No, it felt more like a test, one that Ethan knew could not be answered lightly. The words hung in the air, thick with expectation. The eyes of her elite guard were fixed on him, their expressions unreadable, while the human delegation stood off to the side, nervously waiting for his response. Ethan could feel the tension building, the silence stretching out longer than it should have. He knew he could give the diplomatic answer. He could say that she was a brilliant leader, that her wisdom was unmatched, that humanity was honored to even be in her presence. But that would be a lie. And deep down, Ethan hated lies. They never got you anywhere in the long run. So instead, his lips parted before he could stop himself, and he blurted, "You look so sexy." The words left his mouth before his brain could catch up. His heart raced, and for a moment, he regretted it. The room fell dead silent. The eyes of everyone in the room turned to him, and he could feel a deep flush creeping up his neck. What had he just said? Queen Vaxara's lips curled into a slight smile, a mysterious glint in her violet eyes. Ethan couldn't quite read her expression. Was she amused, offended, intrigued? For a long moment, she did nothing. Then, she leaned back in her chair, resting her chin on one hand as though considering his words carefully. The tension in the room tightened further, and Ethan could hear the sharp intakes of breath from his fellow humans. None of them had expected this. "Well," she said slowly, her voice low and filled with that same velvety smoothness. "I had not expected such honesty." Her smile widened just slightly.
"Perhaps this will be an interesting negotiation." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond.
Was that a good sign? Or had he just royally messed up the entire meeting? His mind raced, trying to piece together a plan, but nothing came. All he could do was stand there, trying to keep his composure in front of the most powerful alien in the galaxy, the Zorath guards, who had been silent up until now, shifted slightly, but none of them moved toward him. The atmosphere was thick with a strange mix of curiosity and something else he couldn't quite place. Queen Vaxara stood up from her throne, her movements fluid and graceful, her presence overwhelming. Ethan had to fight the urge to take a step back. She seemed to tower over him, not in height, but in sheer energy. "I appreciate your honesty, Captain Dre," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "But be warned, such boldness will not go unchallenged." Ethan's eyes flicked to the guards, their weapons glinting in the soft lighting. He swallowed hard, keeping his voice steady. "I'm not one for playing games, Your Majesty. I speak the truth, no matter the cost."
Vaxara studied him for a moment, and then a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval passed her lips.
"I admire that," she said, her voice still smooth, but now carrying a trace of something deeper. "Very well, Captain. Let us get to the business at hand." The rest of the meeting proceeded, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that things were different now. There was a strange tension in the air, a quiet pull that seemed to grow stronger with each passing minute. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about Queen Vaxara, something beyond her physical beauty or her commanding presence. There was a depth to her that he couldn't quite grasp, a mystery that seemed to draw him in. As the conversation continued, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at the Queen. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was more than that. She was a leader, a force of nature, and there was something magnetic about her that made it hard for him to focus on anything else. The negotiations continued smoothly, with the Zorath Queen proving to be a shrewd and calculated negotiator. Despite her beauty, she was not easily swayed. Every word she spoke was measured and precise, each decision a step toward furthering her people's interests. And yet, even as they discussed matters of intergalactic trade and diplomacy, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Vaxara was playing a game with him, one he wasn't sure he fully understood. At the end of the meeting, Queen Vaxara dismissed the others, leaving only Ethan and her closest advisors in the room. "Captain Dre," she said, her voice no longer veiled in the calm of negotiation, but was something more personal. "We are not so different, you and I. You are here not just to negotiate for your people, but to test me, to see what I am really like behind this throne." Ethan remained silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, and he could feel the heat rising between them, the closeness he hadn't expected. She was not just a queen. She was a complex being, one who had lived for centuries and seen more than Ethan could possibly imagine. "I came here to do my job," Ethan said finally, his voice steady, though he wasn't sure why he felt so off balance. "But I will admit, you are different from what I expected." Vaxara's eyes glinted, and she took a step closer to him. "What do you think of me now, Captain Dre?" The question hung in the air, but this time Ethan had no answer. There was no diplomatic line he could use, no prepared speech that would do. All he could do was look into her eyes and try to understand the enigma that was Vaxara, the alien queen who had caught him off guard, who had intrigued him in ways he hadn't expected. And in that moment he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Captain Ethan Dre's mind raced as he left the grand hall of the Zorath ship. The meeting had gone unexpectedly well, considering his honest response to Queen Vaxara's question. The words, "You look so sexy," echoed in his mind, a phrase that had left his lips without warning. He couldn't help but think about the look on Vaxara's face. She hadn't scolded him, nor had she seemed angry. Instead, she had smiled. A small, knowing smile that was almost more dangerous than any threat. But now, as he walked down the long metallic corridors of the ship, he felt the weight of her presence still hanging in the air. Was it a game? Was she testing him? Or was there something more behind her actions? Something he couldn't quite figure out. Ethan had met many powerful figures in his life, but none quite like Queen Vaxara. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a force of nature, captivating and enigmatic, and he found himself drawn to her more than he wanted to admit. As he made his way to his quarters, he thought about his mission. The United Federation had sent him here to negotiate with the Zorath, to secure a trade agreement that would benefit both sides. On the surface, it was a simple task, but Ethan knew better. The Zorath were a powerful and unpredictable species. They didn't just make deals for profit, they made them for control. And the last thing humanity needed was another powerful enemy in the galaxy. He entered his room and sat down, trying to shake off the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind. He had to focus. The negotiations weren't over yet. Vaxara had only begun to show him what she was capable of, and the real test was still ahead. But as he looked out the window of his quarters, watching the stars streak past the ship, he couldn't deny that something inside him had changed. His respect for Vaxara had grown, but so had his fascination with her. It wasn't just her beauty that had caught his attention. It was her mind, her power, and the way she carried herself with such confidence and control. The door to his quarters chimed, breaking his thoughts. Ethan quickly stood up, his hand hovering near the sidearm on his belt. He didn't know who would be visiting him at this hour, but he wasn't about to take any chances. "Come in!" he called, his voice steady. The door slid open, and to his surprise, it was not one of his fellow diplomats, but a Zoreth officer. She was tall, with dark purple skin, and the same violet eyes that seemed to pierce through the depths of his thoughts. Her uniform was sharp and immaculate, and her posture was perfect. She didn't speak immediately, just stood in the doorway, observing him. Ethan met her gaze and raised an eyebrow. "I have been sent to escort you to the Queen," the officer finally spoke, her voice firm but respectful. "She wishes to speak with you." "Lead the way," he said, his curiosity piqued. He followed the officer through the ship's hallways, his mind racing once again. Why did Vaxara want to speak with him now? Hadn't their meeting earlier been enough? The tension between them had been palpable, and he wondered what she was hoping to achieve by summoning him again so soon. They arrived at a private chamber at the far end of the ship, a room that was far more luxurious than the rest of the ship. The walls were adorned with shimmering patterns, and the lighting was soft, giving the room an almost ethereal quality. At the center of the room stood Queen Vaxara, her dark purple cloak flowing elegantly behind her. She was alone, and her eyes immediately locked onto Ethan's. "Captain Dre," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "I trust you've had time to reflect on our earlier conversation?" Ethan couldn't help but smile, despite the nerves that were beginning to settle in his stomach. "I've had plenty of time," he said, his voice steady. "I'm sure you've already figured out that I'm not the most conventional diplomat." Vaxara smiled back, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips.
"No, you are not. But that is why I find you so intriguing."
Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had known that he was different from the other diplomats. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, and he wasn't afraid to take risks. But why would that intrigue her? What was she really after? "You seem to be in no hurry to finish our negotiations," Ethan said, taking a step closer to her. Most people would be eager to close the deal as quickly as possible. Vaxara tilted her head, studying him with those piercing violet eyes. "I'm not like most people, Captain. And as for our negotiations, they are important, yes. But I find our personal connection to be far more fascinating." The words caught Ethan off guard. Was she really suggesting what he thought she was suggesting? He wasn't sure if this was another games, or if she was actually being serious. The line between the personal and the professional had already been blurred in their earlier conversation. But this was something else entirely.
"I'm here to do a job," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice neutral.
"And I'll do it, whether or not we have a personal connection." Vaxara's smile deepened, and she took a step toward him. "Of course, Captain."
"But you are human, aren't you? And humans are not as immune to connection as you might think."
The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had always prided himself on keeping things professional, on keeping his emotions in check. But there was something about Vaxara, something that made it hard to stay detached. "I don't want to waste your time," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "I'm here for the Federation, not for whatever this is." Vaxara studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. And yet, here you are, Captain, in my private chambers, speaking to me as though we are equals. You may say you're here for the Federation, but I know there's more to it than that. Ethan didn't respond right away. The way she spoke, the way she looked at him. It was like she was trying to peel away his layers, getting closer to something deeper. But he couldn't let her. Not now, not when so much was at stake. "I don't need to remind you, Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm again, "that I'm here to negotiate, not to become entangled in whatever this is." Vaxara didn't seem upset by his words. If anything, her eyes gleamed with a kind of amusement. "You may be right, Captain. But we are all entangled in something, even you."
The words left Ethan unsettled. What did she mean by that?
He couldn't be sure, but he didn't like the way she seemed to know him better than he knew himself. The room fell silent for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Ethan knew that this meeting, like the first, wasn't just about trade agreements. It was about something much more complicated. He had no idea where this was going, or what Vaxara really wanted from him. But he did know one thing. He was caught in her web, whether he liked it or not.